Hi, welcome to another Virtualized Geek demo video. We're going to be installing VMware's OpenStack appliance within a VMware Fusion environment. A special thanks goes out to Ken Hui over at cloudarchitectmusing.com who did the write-up for this process. You can visit his website, again, cloudarchitectmusing.com. So of course we're working with a system with VMware Fusion already installed, and as part of the process we're going to actually install VMware ESXi running in a nested environment within our VMware Fusion environment. So the first part of the video will walk through installing ESXi. Of course you'll need to have downloaded the VMware ESXi 5.5 ISO and all system requirements. Again, this system is a system with 8 gig of RAM, an i7 processor, and an SSD drive. So keep in mind you may not get as much mileage. Some special notes: we are using internal networking for this lab, so there's not much fancy nested networking as you've seen in some of my other videos. So we're selecting VMnet 2, which is a host-only network, and this will allow all of our VMs, our ESXi server, our vCenter, appliance, all of that will be running within the same network, as well as our Nova installation, our actual vCenter, and all of that will be running on the same network. So, you know, some handy gadgets when working with Mac. I'm normally using VMware Workstation. Special function keys really don't work well in the Mac, so you have to send the key using the menu option within the virtual machine menu of the VMware Fusion. So as you see, ESXi, the install is pretty straightforward. After you've pretty much selected all of the defaults, we can pretty much fast forward to a successful install of the product. Can't say this enough. Make sure you document all your passwords. I'm using either password 1 or VMware for all of the passwords. Special note: Ken also made note that you need to set static IP addresses, which is pretty good practice in general with your ESXi. And another note, which I learned very hard lesson learned with this demo, is to always make sure DNS is working well, whether you use host files or you use the actual DNS server. We don't have a whole lot of room for this lab to run extra servers, so I'm using host files. I actually walk you through this process of actually editing. If you're not familiar with Linux, I walk you through the process of using VI to edit the host file within your vCenter appliance, as well as the you won't need a host file of ESXi at all, but it's extremely important that you do that. Also, you need to edit the host file on the Mac. I spent quite some time troubleshooting the ability to deploy the OVA for the Nova appliance, for the OpenStack appliance, because I did not edit the host file on the Mac. So it's important that you have proper DNS for all of your workstations. As far as memory is concerned, we're going with 4 gig of memory for our ESXi install, and for our vCenter appliance, we're going to go ahead and run that on 4 gig of RAM as well. You'll note by default, the vCenter appliance will want to select 8 gig of memory. We want to make sure we run that on with 4 gig of memory, especially if you are running this as I am on a Mac with only 8 gig of RAM. Fusion is not as generous with memory over subscription as VMware Workstation is. So again, this is the process to edit the host file for on your vCenter server appliance, VCSA. So when editing your host file, we want to make sure that we make entries for obviously the vCenter server, for the ESXi host, and for the virtual machine that's running on ESXi that will actually host the vCenter appliance. I'm using a 172.16.1.x IP address subnet. So our ESXi server is at .100. Our vCenter appliance is at .101, and our VOVA, our OpenStack virtual appliance, will be at .102. Now it's critical that we again document these host names and the IP addresses, because we'll be using them throughout the installation of the solution. So this is again one of those hard lessons that I've learned throughout doing these labs at home, that just because there are labs doesn't mean we shouldn't follow proper IT standards or proper best practices in documenting our passwords, our network configuration, and the configuration of the actual virtual machines that we create in the environment. We'll go ahead and start the next phase of the installation, which is to go ahead and launch our vCenter appliance and finish the configuration of the vCenter appliance. Again, root and VMware is our username and password. We're going to go ahead and accept the license agreement and complete the configuration of the vCenter appliance. We're going to do a set custom configuration for the vCenter server setup. This is again following the advice of Ken from his website. We're going to choose the integrated database. We're also going to configure single sign-on. Again, for integrated single sign-on, we're going to again leverage the VCSA, but it's important that we configure DNS because single sign-on needs DNS. Active Directory, we're not going to run Windows in this environment. We can skip this. Network time protocol, we're going to leave blank again. However, it's critical to remember that we need to set up proper time. I have my VMs syncing to my Mac workstation so that correct time is configured. And then we can just validate configuration and then go ahead and log in to the actual vCenter, the VSA based vCenter client, or better yet, the web client for vSphere. This was a pretty fun experience for me. This is actually my first time really using the web client. I've stayed away from it so far, but this is, again, since we have very limited resources for this lab, I'm leveraging as much of the actual Mac's resources as possible by having using the web client instead of creating an infrastructure to run the flat C environment. So this video is actually twofold. We're walking you through both the installation of the OpenStack the OpenStack appliance, as well as configuring ESXi and vCenter on a laptop. So, you can come back and reference this video to actually install vCenter on a laptop as well as ESXi. We're creating a data center. We're going to name our data center. And then we're going to create a cluster, and we're going to name our cluster OpenStack. Again, documentation is critical. You'll need to know both your default data center and your default cluster for the installation of the OpenStack appliance. We're going to go ahead and turn DRS on and leave that on, and everything else we're going to leave default for our data center and as well as for our cluster itself, our OpenStack cluster. So once we've installed both the cluster and the data center, not necessarily in that order, of course, we're going to go ahead and add our host. Again, make sure our DNS is working correctly. We're going to go ahead and use the short DNS name. We're going to set the password to password 1, root, and password 1 was what we selected earlier on. We're going to select the encryption key. And that's pretty much it for configuring vCenter. So, we have a typical vCenter install in which we're using a VCSA, vCenter server appliance. We have a single ESXi server with 4 gig of RAM. And now we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping, make sure that we have the OpenStack named to the cluster. And then we're going to go ahead and configure networking. So for networking, we're going to add a single additional vSwitch using the second NIC card we installed. And we're going to assign it to a port group called BR100. BR100 actually comes directly from the documentation for the OpenStack appliance. It's important to keep in mind that you really should reference the OpenStack appliance documentation. I found it incredibly useful in troubleshooting this install. A couple of times I couldn't get the OVA deployed, as well as I was having trouble with once I did get the OVA deployed, I was having trouble deploying instances. And the documentation is not very long, but it's very helpful, and it saved me probably a ton of time going back and referencing Ken's material. Actually, even if I would have referenced Ken's material, I probably wouldn't have caught the mistakes that I did catch within that. So once we have the networking fully deployed, we're going to go ahead and deploy the OVA. The OVA is about 3 gig, and it takes a while to download. It's on the partner store for appliances. So if you've ever downloaded a appliance from the partner store, you know how long or how slow that process can take. So I really advise you doing that in advance, or you'll spend maybe an hour, hour and a half of wait time downloading that that OVA. So this is kind of one of the gadgets with the OVA deployment that I mentioned earlier. I spent maybe about 3 hours troubleshooting why I couldn't deploy this OVA. I changed the default behavior of the cluster for virtual machine hardware. I did a ton of things to try. I rearranged the memory. I tried to resort to the legacy C-Pound client to try and deploy the OVA. Kept erroring out after 15, only after like 15% progress, when all in all, it turned out to be a simple problem of DNS. Even though we're using a web client, and the web client is of course running on the vCenter appliance, and most of the interaction you would think is coming from the vCenter appliance, that's not the case. I still needed to create a DNS entry for the ESXi host within my workstation, and that solved my problems with deploying the OVA. As another point, you need to install the integration tool for to be able to browse your local hard disk to upload the OVA to the vCenter. You don't have to really worry about that too much. You'll get prompted, as we just saw in the video, to install it. The prompts are pretty straightforward for installing the OVA. We're going to use all our defaults. The biggest thing is we're going to make sure we select the appropriate data store, which we only have one, and we have to thin provision the storage because, again, we only have a 40 gig data store, and this image by itself, by default, I believe, is 40 gig out of the box. For the network configuration, again, this is why we document our configs. We want to make sure we have the correct data center, the correct cluster, and again, the IP address to our vCenter appliance, as well as the correct username and passwords. It's critical that we fill this session 2E out correctly with that information, because there's no easy way to change this. Data feeds the OpenStack appliance, and there's no easy way to go back and change that within the interface of the appliance. I fat fingered, I believe, the password, and since I fat fingered the password, I had to go back, destroy the VM, and then redeploy the OpenStack appliance to get full functionality, or not even just get the OpenStack interface to function correctly. Once we've deployed the OpenStack appliance, we can go ahead and visit the website for the appliance. Again, we're using 172.16.1.102, and we can deploy a instance. It's important to, if we're not seeing this NOVA availability zone in the pull down in the availability zone, there's a chance that we're not working correctly. If you're getting either error or status unknown in any of these sessions, then again, we haven't correctly installed the appliance, and more than likely it's the settings that we put in the custom settings tab when we deploy the OVA. Now we're deploying a default instance based off of the default Debian install, and it took roughly about 10 minutes. As you can see, the Nova is using the interface to the API to vCenter to initiate the installation of the VM and to power it on. So we'll see both the powered on VM in our vCenter once that process completes. It took, again, a while. It took about 10 minutes, so have some patience just as long as we see some status activity happening in both vCenter and within the OpenStack dashboard. We should be all good. Well, you know what? That's it for this demo video. It was a pleasure again servicing you guys. I look forward to comment, feedback. Visit Ken's blog. Visit us on virtualizedgeekers.com as well. And I look forward to the next video. Subscribe to our Tech Talks on iTunes. Virtualized Geeks Tech Talks. Tech Talk with no space. Thanks a lot, and talk to you next video.